Welcome back to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast. Thanks again for being a part of the conversation. Normally about this time, I'd be saying I'm here with my brother, Paul Jobson, but unfortunately, Paul is not able to join us today. Paul is out and about, and we'll be talking about where he is when he gets back. We'll have good conversation about his summer and the cool things that he's been able to do. But today, I get to have a conversation with a good friend. He's from across the pond, but he's been here in the U.S. for a long time. Also been, grew up over in China, hung out back in the U.K. for a bit, here in the U.S., back to the U.K. He's just all over. He's just had quite a life. Now is the assistant coach at Cal Baptist in Riverside, California. And with me is Josh Glover. Josh, how you doing, man?
Yeah, doing really well, Phil. Thanks so much for having me on. I was a bit disappointed not to see Paul there, but oh well, we'll have to hear all about his trip when he gets back. But no, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to obviously be here and be now involved in some form of football, and excited to have this conversation with you. Obviously, we go back a little bit, and having it just me and you again having a conversation like we did even watching the England USA game, the World Cup. I like that you got the England top on now, though. That looks good.
Yeah, well, I did that for you, just to hopefully make you feel welcome. So that's and you're not alone. Most people are disappointed to not see Paul here too. So I have no doubt that is something that, we'll be missing, but that's okay, because I know we're gonna have a great conversation. You're gonna have a lot of great stuff to share. You had mentioned beforehand, a couple episodes ago, we had Graham Daniels on. Said you had a pretty good. He's been quite an impact on your life. And so just what is that impact that Graham's had?
There we go. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I lost you.
I tested the Wi-Fi, so I feel like it should be okay.
Okay.
I apologize about that.
Not a problem. All right, where did it cut off? Do you remember? Did you hear the question?
I heard you mentioned beforehand, and then it cut off.
Okay. I'll just go again. Well, Josh, you're not alone there. Most people are also, I no doubt, disappointed that Paul is not here with us today. But we just got to move on. We got to trust that we're going to have just as good of a conversation as we would have with Paul. He always has some great insights, but I'm just excited to have a good conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
I know, this season, for whatever reason, I think we've had more Brits than Americans on the show so far. And so we are just going to call it football today. And that is fine. And if we slip into soccer or football, folks, what we're talking about. So it will likely be football. But Josh, we always start with sharing your story, just sharing where I mentioned a little bit in the intro, but just share your story with the audience. I'm assuming most people don't know you, but some people listening will, but I'm sure that they'll be surprised with some of the stuff too. So just share your story, how you got to be the assistant coach at Cal Baptist and everything that came before that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. Well, I grew up in a family of 8, mum, dad, 4 older sisters, and then dad turned to mum and said, "Hey, can we try for a boy?" And he got 2. And so I have a twin brother, and actually he's flying in tomorrow for our 30th birthday next week. So I'm very excited to see him. And anyway, so family of 8, we moved to China when I was 5. And I kind of came off the back of a providential calling. It felt like the Lord had called my father and our family to China. And so that was obviously a big step for us as a family and for me as an individual. And it was very apparent to me from a young age that God was real, God had called us. And so fast forward a couple years, beginning to really competitively play football. I really became passionate about football because of Dad. Dad was a professional footballer growing up, and played at Norwich as a youth player, and then went on to play for Portsmouth, played against the likes of kind of Kenny Dalglish. He always tells the story of playing against Kenny Dalglish as a young lad for Portsmouth at Celtic, and so when they played them at Celtic. So Dad was very passionate about football, had a twin brother, so you've got your best mate there, and he tells the story of how we both got our first football, and Joel kicked his and I picked mine up. So I was the goalkeeper, Joel was the player, and the rest is kind of history, as they say, because we spent every waking moment just playing football, breathing football, talking football. I think Mum got a bit crazy. I think she was very glad she had four girls. So no, it was wonderful. And so from a very young age, there's this really clear blend of faith, family, and football, and in that order. And it's funny. I'm glad you said we can talk about it as football, because I was trying to think, how do you put this together with soccer? Is it soccer, salvation, and what's the final S? So I'm glad it's faith, family, and football. But fast forward, I think football was a big part of who I was growing up, and for good reasons and for bad reasons. And I found myself in England just after college, playing football there, but really just this hunger for God, because I just felt like, I wasn't really walking with him at the time. Even though I was raised a Christian, I kind of had a season where I was just trying to figure out who I was, and in some senses walking prodigally, and knew I loved football, knew I loved the Lord, and found myself back at Westmont, and warm up to my first game. I tore my ligament, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that really helped me reform my identity back into who the Lord said I was, and so began to really grow a passion for football and faith, and combining that, but also relationships, because I think our family was, we were very familiar with being in relationship with other people, and using football as a bit of a platform for that. And so from Westmont, I then left and came back to the UK. Began to just be blessed to play football and get paid to do so, and then was also simultaneously working in sports ministry. So that was a huge answer to a prayer I had when I was leaving university at Westmont. 2019, find myself coming back just for a summer just to play football here again with an organization called the Seahorses, that are part of Missionary Athletes International, MAI, and a friend of mine, Joey, who's just an absolute legend, just said, "Hey, look, I'd love for you to come and play for me and work with me, and hopefully come and get a master's here too." And just felt like it wasn't a door I pushed, but the Lord had opened, and found myself back in the States, back in California, beautiful California, which when you're living in at the time Isle of Sheppey, and it was a bit dreary. Sounds incredible. It sounds like a paradise. And so came back over here, and actually that's when I got to meet you in person and stay with your parents, which was a huge blessing. Shout out to those two, just unbelievable. Steve and Barbara, just wonderful. And and then found myself coaching at an NAIA school, and then Joey moved on to Biola during COVID. Everything sort of shut down. I got connected with Co at CBU. That didn't, for a short period of time, that didn't work out for logistical reasons pertaining to my international visa. But Biola were amazing. The Lord opened the door there, and I went and worked at Biola University, had a great year with Joey, and that opened the door to come back to CBU. And so it's been a wonderful year. That's a quick journey through my life and to where I am now, coaching at CBU.
Yeah, so through all of that, we got a lot of soccer or football. Sorry, like I said, I'm gonna go back and forth.
That's okay.
We got most people are apologizing for saying football on here. I'm gonna apologize for saying soccer. But we got a lot of. It's actually funny on that note because that I did the interview early on. If you didn't listen to it, folks, go back. Clyde Best. And the most comments I've ever got on any interview ever on this show is on that episode, not because of how great of an episode it was, which it was. Clyde's just an amazing man, but because all the West Ham fans were mad that I kept calling it soccer. They're like, it's football, you bloke, and so I was like, that's all the comments we got. So folks out there, I apologize in advance if it bothers you. We're going to say football. If that bothers you, well, hey, sorry. We say soccer most of the time. But anyway, it's something that you have so much football. Your whole life pretty much has been that, a lot of it, right? Ministry football, as you said, faith, family football. Not a lot of people have it. A lot of people, may coach, but they have other things going on. It's been a lot of, you've been fortunate to be able to do that. Now I know that in your home, obviously your dad, Robert Glover, folks, amazing man. I was able to interview him for my other podcast, and I'm hoping to get him on here as well to talk about some of these things. But in your home growing up, how was football used just in your childhood? I mean, what did your dad use football analogies? And if so, what did that look like? And what did you learn from that?
Yeah, no, football was a big form of life lessons, I think, and it was a great opportunity for my brother and I to walk through the emotions of failure, or actually, I shouldn't say failure. Loss and the challenges that come with football, and the challenges that come with, what does it look like to be a teammate? What does it look like to serve your brother first, right? When you've got two twins that are competing, what does it look like to be a good winner? And how does that apply to life? And also kind of the nuance of being in China and seeing how football was used to transcend barriers, really, and to reach the community. And so I think I want to honor my dad first and foremost, because I saw him use it in China for the mission that he was called to reach a people group he obviously he founded the charity Care for Children, and it was essentially based around, the heart of it is to have a heart for the fathers, to place children who are in orphanages back into families and to kind of reach that people group. And I remember the early years of being in Shanghai, he started a football team over there, and we were able to kind of play with, coach, just kind of mesh through football with the children at the orphanage. And they ended up kind of going on to play in a local school tournament and winning the cup. And that was a beautiful picture of how football can be used in ministry. But all throughout that, we're seeing lessons of overcoming challenges, overcoming the things that kind of hold us back in life. And I saw that for these young men, for these, I would say, boys actually at the time, who despite having disabilities, despite having not having parents, that were very we're very forthright, we're very strong, very much so strong in their character and how they pursued just wanting to kind of be the best versions of themselves through football, and found joy in it. So I saw that. And then definitely throughout our childhood at home, I saw my father kind of encourage us and challenge us with football analogies. And I remember one of the things my dad said to me, and I'll never forget this. He said, football comes in seasons. I remember we had a season, we just didn't play very well, and things didn't go our way. We were playing for the Shanghai Dolphins of all teams, and it was an interesting team. And Joel and I were on the same team, but we kind of came into the league quite late, and so we played with the team at the bottom. And we got them out as a team, my brother and I and all the boys on the team, we got them out of kind of the last place spot. I think we climbed 2 or 3 places, but we finished sort of just below mid-table. And I remember my dad said to me, football comes in seasons. You can't expect things just to kind of happen all at once. And I think that's something that's kind of stayed with me throughout life. And you see that actually real growth, real things that matter happen over time, and we can't have everything immediate. And so that was a lesson that I remember learning. But definitely throughout our childhood, we would see different lessons, whether it was watching Michael Owen overcome an injury, or how David Beckham dealt with fame, and should we be proud? I remember my dad also saying, I used to say, Dad, was I good today? I was good today, wasn't I? And he said, you know what, son, you have to be humble. You can't be telling other people that you're good. You can allow other people to tell you you're good, but your job is to focus on playing well and serving others. And so I think little lessons like that have stuck with me, and I'm very grateful to him for that. And then obviously lessons from Joel, if you're not strong enough, you're going to get knocked over, or if you're not quick enough, the ball's going in the back of the net. And so you kind of learn through those things too. So I think you can apply those, and there are many parallels to life as well.
Yeah, I love that. Just hearing your dad talking about the humility, but also the service. I know that's something that a couple episodes ago we had Graham Daniels, where he talked about, when you truly have your identity in Christ, you can be safe to serve, right? That idea of not just trying to survive. I think that idea of wasn't I good, right? That is that achieved identity. I know if you listen to that, if you didn't listen to that interview with Graham Daniels, folks, go back and listen to that. But that idea of when whose you are and who you are, then you have that freedom, right, to be able to serve. You don't need that outside approval from whoever, right? And we all want the approval from our dad, of course. But I love that your dad kept pointing to like the importance is that you're able to serve your brother. Now, I want to get into a little bit too of that the use of soccer, as you said, your dad was able to use it, and I have your dad told the whole story of that in the interview I did on Think Orphan. Folks, go listen. I'll link to it in the show notes. The interview that I was able to do with your dad on Think Orphan. He talks about that, how he was able to build trust by creating that team and forming that team, and then by winning the championship, obviously. But that actually, as he talked about it, he was able to get his own bowl in the kitchen and all this stuff that he talked about. But I wanted to hear from your perspective on being a kid in China. I know it's going to shock a lot of people, but you don't look a lot like the Chinese kids that you were living with. So I'm just going to make an assumption, but I don't want to make an assumption. But did you use football as a tool and as a vehicle to be able to build trust, to be able to build those relationships with these people? You're coming in as the American kid, and they might think it's kind of a novelty, but a novelty doesn't necessarily build trust. So was that something that you were able to do? I mean, or am I just wrong on that account?
No, absolutely. Well, first off, I'm not an American kid. I'm an English kid. Sorry. To be said.
I did say that. Wow, that was just a little faux pas. That was worse than saying soccer. So I'm sorry about that. I apologize.
Okay.
I apologize.
Right. No, I mean
a white kid. Let's say a white kid, right?
Yeah, a white Western kid from a different background coming into a very rural Shanghai at the time, especially when we first moved, and then into Beijing. No, football, as I said, and this is why I love the game. It transcends barriers, language barriers, cultural barriers, and everything that kind of comes in between. But I remember, dad being very intentional, dad and mum, to be honest. Mum was wonderful at serving the community, and I just touch on her real quickly. I remember homeless people I remember us coming home from school and homeless people being in our home because mum had brought them home and given them a shower and given them food, and we're talking to them. And so both mum and dad really kind of gave us a great picture of what it looks like to serve. And I remember them being really intentional about us going into the villages that kind of were just on the other side of the walls of our compound. We lived in a small compound. Funny enough, they called it Beverly Hills. It wasn't Beverly Hills, but there you go. But I remember us going into the village, and I remember Joel and I, there was a sense of security around this football. Like, we'll bring this football in with us, because I think for us at the time it was, we'll know we have fun together. We can bring this ball, and we're a bit unsure. It's a bit strange. And I think on the other side of that wall, it was a real clear dichotomy of wealth and poverty, if you will, but also the Western culture and the Eastern culture. And I think on the other side of that wall were children who were probably pretty timid of, who are these people coming in here? And it's funny that the ball kind of brought you together. There was this beautiful mesh of bringing us together. And so we get the ball out, and next thing you know, there's a kid just runs over and kicks the ball. I don't think he said a word. I think I just remember this little boy running over, and next thing you know, there was 3 or 4, and so it was me and my brother and 3 or 4 of these young Chinese lads just kicking a ball about. And I think my sister tried to jump in, Anna, and we were like, "Go away, Anna. Let us play our football." But no, the girls were great at football too. But I think that's a beautiful picture of how we were able to build trust in the community. And my dad tells the story. I don't know if he's told it in the podcast, but we ended up having a lot of people over for the village from the village for Christmas one year, and because we had established those relationships. And in China, you kind of do food family style. You put the food together, and we had the kids come over, the lads we play football with, and the families, and they kind of mixed all the mashed potatoes with the pie, and it's just this weird blend. And they were trying to be really polite, eating it and thinking and saying sorry that it was lovely, but we were just sitting there laughing and just thinking that was crazy. And so there are many cultural barriers, as you can see, even in cuisine and how you eat. But football really helped us to build those relationships, and it also, it helped us to develop skills, develop language skills, develop skills in learning how to relate to other people. There's many times growing up where I felt that I wish I'd grown up in England because of the professional opportunities, but actually the rich cultural opportunities and the ability to kind of relate cross-culturally was a real blessing, and football was a big part of that, of being able to have those relations. And I saw that all the way through school, all the way up to high school, where I was friends with the Korean lads who'd come over from Korea in the international school, and we would play football at lunch and break time. And so you begin to see how a game can really bring people together. And I think even as we're touching on leadership, actually not just touching, I'm sure we'll go into depth on leadership, but I think one of the most natural things about leadership is it's how do you bring people together in a way that that serves them, but also that feels natural to them. And there are times, of course, where things are challenging, like the boy on the other side of the village, and us going into the village for the first time, being timid, being unsure. It gives us a sense of security, but eventually from that kind of uncomfort or uncomfortability, you become comfortable through this kind of medium, which is football. So
yeah, there's so much there, and I think I can't help but think, as you said, part of you wishes you grew up in the UK for those opportunities from the professional side, but to see what you're doing now and to see how living that cross-cultural living with coaching at the university here in the US, I know at Biola, and I know now at CBU and at Westcliff, you had a lot of internationals on those teams. And has that helped, that understanding of that cross-cultural? I know from the recruiting side, I presume it has, but also just from bringing those teams together and being able to be a coach on that side of it. Are you using those things?
Yeah, it's funny how the Lord works, isn't it? I think he was very intentional in those things, and I think absolutely, it's very much so a component of what we do and part of the recruiting process. I mean, we've got lads right now from Germany, from Norway, from Brazil, France. We've got lads, a lad from Luxembourg. We're just in the process of recruiting a lad from Cyprus as well. So I mean, there's definitely lots of different kind of components that come with each culture. And so being able to understand not just the various cultures, because you can't understand every culture, of course, but understanding how to relate in a way where you're different, but you can find similarities, and you can find the things that are important to people, while also being it's funny, we talk about Ted Lasso. I love that scene with you've talked about Ted Lasso, we haven't talked about him yet, but just watching your podcast, I know we talk a lot about Ted Lasso, but I love the scene with the darts, and he says be curious, not judgmental. And I think that's a beautiful picture of what does it look like for us, especially with these young men, to say, hey, yes, you're coming into a new environment, but I'm curious about who you are and how and how we can learn from you and how you can play a part in this team. Because faith, family, and football, when you're putting a team together, you're actually putting a family together, right? These are lads who are supposed to be a band of brothers in many ways. And so understanding the different components, and also protecting the lads that you have in the group, who are you bringing in, and how are they going to mold, and how are they going to fit into the culture and the environment and build chemistry with the group. So those things are all very important. So yeah, it's definitely something that helped.
I think something you said there is so good, because so often people will say we need people to come in and we need to help them assimilate into our culture, rather than saying how can we together create our culture using all of the different things that everyone brings to the table.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, as you were talking there, that you're really doing the latter, not the former. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, our head coach, Co Michelson's fantastic at that too. He spent time in the UK being an American, and he's been around the world a bit. And Stephen Marshall as well. He's someone who's traveled a lot and is just very personable. And I think ultimately it comes from Christ, right? Being a Christ-centered university and a Christ-centered program, because, it's easy to say you're Christ-centered university in America. I think there's a lot of them, but actually really carrying that out, it's caring for the person first. And saying, what do you have to bring to the table, and how's the Lord formed you, and what does the Lord want to do through you, right? Everyone's got a purpose, everyone's got a story, and everyone has something to bring. And so when there's a sense of ownership from these lads, not just over the fact that they're playing football, but that they can bring something to the table that's unique, then I think that blends really well, and it creates a culture and an environment in which we collaborate really well, and we do so for the glory of God.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. That was a good segue. I mean, you said purpose, and that was, everyone has their purpose. And so what is your personal why? What is your life purpose, and how are you living it out in your coaching and other areas of your life?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good question. You sent me the questions before, and obviously I don't know if we're going behind the scenes a little bit there, but just looking at it and thinking about it, and first and foremost, I think it comes from Christ, from the Lord, right? And that permeates through everything else that I do. And I think the reason it does is, and I will just touch on this. I love that you had Graham Daniels on. I was a bit of disciple of his, and was part of Christians in Sport in some other ways. And it's funny, because if you hear me talk about pray, play, say, I was just talking about it with my life group the other day. We lead a life group over here, and we're talking about pray, play, say, and how that applies to life as well, right? Instead of just playing, what does it look like to live? And then also received, not achieved identities. It's been something that we've been talking about a lot recently. So to then see the podcast and see that was there, I was like, oh no, you've got this incredible man on, and this incredible person of the faith in football. How do I follow that up? But the reality is, he is who he is because he's been faithful, and because he's known his call. And I think that bringing it all back, it's about knowing the call from Christ, that he chose me, and that I'm saved, but not just saved to sit in that, to be kind of passive, but to be active. And I think one of the things that's really formed over the last couple of years is just this understanding that we're called to seek God first, seek him and his kingdom, seek his righteousness and his kingdom. And I think it's about being that freedom from being saved, that I've been chosen. It's not anything that I can do or anything I have done or continue to do, but it's the fact that I've been chosen, that he's called me. He says that I'm good. He says that I'm right in standing with him because of his son, frees me to then go and live actively. And so from there comes this desire to live, as I alluded to, for the kingdom. And I think reframing my mindset, that it's not just about being good enough or avoiding sin. It's about actually living for the kingdom and bringing the kingdom to people. And bringing the kingdom means bringing peace, bringing purpose, bringing power, because we get power from the Holy Spirit. We get peace from knowing God's with us, and we get purpose from the fact that actually he says, go and make disciples of all nations. And so being a kingdom driven person means that I think, trying to make it a little bit more succinct, it means that my purpose is to bring the kingdom of God wherever I'm going. But specifically for football, it's to bring the kingdom of God in the areas where I am, to disciple young men, to evangelize to young men, that they would kind of grow into the understanding that they too are chosen, that God too wants relationship with them, and that from that they can actually live to their full potential, live to their full purpose, live to to be able to have peace when things are challenging. And so navigating how to do that while also kind of carrying out excellence, right? Romans 12 talks about, how can we honor God with everything we have? So I think it's that beautiful blend of trying to honor God and let my life be a piece of worship to him, and but to do so in a way that serves others, that brings the kingdom and brings people into the kingdom and the kingdom to them. So I'm sure I'll be a little bit more succinct with that as I grow up. I've got lots to learn. I'm sure I'll continue to understand how God's using me, but I think in terms of my purpose, I think it's that right there.
Absolutely. No. There's lots of different ways, and I know we'll get into some of those ways that you are living that out. But as we move forward, I want to talk about what was a defining moment, maybe one or two defining moments in your soccer career. Why was it, or why were they so impactful? What did you learn from them? What leadership lessons did you learn from the defining moment?
Yeah, I do have a few. I think the first one I would touch on is and I alluded to earlier, was coming to West Brom and my identity being completely rooted in football. I was liked because I was good at football. I felt like I was doing well because I was good at football. I felt football had brought me there. And warm up to my first game against UCSB, I'm a goalkeeper, so I'm going over and I snap the ligament, and let's see if I can show it to you there. It's got a little scar right there, and there it is right there on the thumb. So tore my ulnar collateral ligament, and I remember finding out and just going sitting in my room and just like, wow, you're worthless. You are, you've got nothing to offer. You've got nothing. And I think the Lord was really kind in those moments of actually reminding me. I remember spending time in the Word and hearing that, Romans 8 talks about that he works all things for the good of those who love him according to his will. I remember that he loved me. He was working out things for my good, but that football was a gift, and that he had brought me there, not me. And so that really began to reframe my understanding of what football was. And so fast forward a couple of years, I had a great time at West Brom, been playing well, and began to play for the Seahorses. So USL 2 team at the time, it was PDL part. It was professional development league. It was wonderful league, top players in the college game kind of coming together through the summer. I remember being told I was the first choice, and then like a week later, this lad shows up from Cal Berkeley. He was at Cal Berkeley, came back from Brazil. Robbie, great goalkeeper, unbelievable, just absolute cat, like just could spring to anything. And I remember just being frustrated, like I'm not playing. Like I ended up being the second choice goalkeeper, and I was still young. I think it was summer of my sophomore year, and just really being kind of like, Lord, what's going on? This is so frustrating. And I just opened up my Bible and I was reading Job 38, and it said in Job 38, it says the Lord answered Job, and he said, "Who are you that questions me? With words without knowledge, right? Where were you when I set the foundations of the earth?" And it said, "Brace yourself, I will question you and you'll answer me." And I just felt like, do you know what? In that moment, the Lord reminded me again. I think I was getting stuck back into football and really wanting to accomplish many things, but the Lord reminded me that he had a purpose beyond myself. Proverbs 19, right? Many of the plans of a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And I think that was really formative for me again, because I was so caught up in being the best and so caught up in wanting to achieve success, but actually I had stopped finding my joy in football. I had stopped finding my joy in the gift that he'd given me and in him. And so that was really a very formative time, because I think, again, as I said earlier, like it's football doesn't come just in one season, it comes in seasons. And so you learn to develop. And that was, we'll probably talk about coaches later, but Cody Supe was my goalkeeper coach that year. And because I wasn't playing, I was just desperate to get better, desperate to work. And that summer was so formative for me in the little things. Like my footwork got so much better. I learned from Robbie, how he could spring. I remember asking him, and how are you so explosive? Well, I lift really heavy. We put a lot of weight, on deadlifts, and I can just fire through my quads and my calves, and there you go. I'm getting to the top corner to everything. And so I just remember wanted to replicate those things. And actually that was, if it was my way, I would have just played, and I probably wouldn't have developed in the same way. I would have thought I was better than, and not really been striving to grow and to develop. And so those are two very formative moments, and I think those were very helpful for me as I went back to England and got my first contract. I remember I had a little bit of a sticky situation. I was considered an international player from America coming back to England, which was interesting. So I had to wait for my international clearance. I missed the first 2 games after signing my contract, and I finally got myself back into the team. And I just I was desperate to play well, but was actually working at the church, and wanting to glorify God. But I went on to play 10 games in a row. I remember my 8th game, to this day, is probably the best game in my career. I just stopped absolutely everything. And I remember, we were playing with these 2 guys, Ryan and Rossi Jarvis. Ryan played in the Premier League for Norwich and scored against Liverpool on his debut. And he was a bit older at the time. I think he was like 35. And I remember Ryan coming up to me after the game, just like, you are unreal. Like, where did that come from? Like, that was special. And I remember just, wow, really, really, really proud. And I remember, again, my dad after the game said, don't get ahead of yourself, just stay humble and you keep working hard. And I ended up playing a couple more games, made a mistake, and I was a young goalkeeper, and I got dropped. And the other goalkeeper came in, and later that in January, manager turned around to me, said, I want to bring in a lot of players. And the chairman said, I can't have 3 goalkeepers on the books. And I know you've played a lot. I know you've done really well, but we're going to let you go. And I just sat there and I thought, wow, this is so unfair. This is ridiculous. But in that moment, I remember the Lord just reminding me of the 2 previous moments at the Seahorses and at Westmont, and just going, do you know what? Things are going to be okay. I've got a plan and a purpose for you. And it gave me peace, and it allowed me to strive and move forward. And I ended up eventually playing at a higher level, and God was very kind to me, and I went through a little bit of a journey, but those were very formative times. And I think those lessons are really carried with me to kind of share with my boys now, that yes, we want to strive for excellence. Yes, we want to be the best. Yes, we want to win, but football is just, it's temporary, and football is part of the picture. It's and this is the most important thing. I think this is the lesson I learned through it all. And if anyone remembers anything from this interview, please remember this: football is what you do, it's not who you are. That's the most important thing. Football is what you do, it's not who you are. And that's true of anything, right? Whether you are watching this as a basketball player or an actor or someone who does accounting, it's what you do, it's not who you are. Who you are is defined by who God says you are, and that can't be touched. That's infinitely and eternally precious and true. So I think those are the things that I learned, and that's kind of how I carry that forward. And I want my boys to know that, because I think that then frees you to ultimately be the best version of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that again reminded me of, as you talked about being dropped, as you talked about it's what you do, not who you are, reminded me of that, Graham saying you're either scared and playing for survival, or you're safe and you're able to serve. Right. And it's that same idea, your dad coming up and saying, be humble so that you can serve. Right. That idea is just so powerful, because what your identity is in will not just inform, it will drive how you act, how you respond to things. That the people say you can't control your circumstances, but you can control how you respond to those circumstances. Right. So absolutely. You can't control being dropped. You can control how you respond to it, and who you are and whose you are will not only inform that, it will drive how you respond to that. So no, that's great to hear that. All right. You played for a lot of different coaches. You played on a lot of different teams in different countries. Who is the best coach, if you have one, or if you have a couple that you played for? What set him apart from the rest, and what lessons about life and leadership did you learn from him?
Yeah. Wow. Very challenging question. I think there's so many great coaches. Dave Wolf at Westmont, Cody Supe, who I alluded to with the Seahorses. AD Hay was Lowestoft coach, and even I mentioned him because even though he let me go, I thought he was great. There was a great staff there, and there's a guy right now who wasn't a coach at the time. His name's Danny Green. He played at Charlton Athletic, played an FA Cup final, played with him at Concord Rangers, and he was already a coach before he was a coach, if you know what I mean, on the pitch, and he's now coaching. He just got I think his first head coach job back in England, either Billericay or someone else, but he was fantastic. Two people I want to touch on, one really briefly, and then the second one I'll kind of go into more detail, was a guy called Thiago Barria, a Brazilian gentleman in Chicago, and just, do you know what, when I looked at him and when I've watched him and when I saw how there were no favorites for him. There were no favorites, and he cared for everyone equally. And that didn't mean everyone played equally, but he cared for everyone equally. And that really reflected Christ to me. That really said a lot to me, but also just to see how he carried himself and how he loved other people, but was firm. Thiago was a very formative individual. I don't know how much he knows that, but very formative individual. That was after my freshman year of college. I went to Chicago. The football was rubbish. It was rubbish, but the coaching was great, and the coaching was superb, and it was because he didn't just focus on football. He wanted to know who I was as a man, and he wanted to know that for everybody, and he wanted to ask the challenging questions and spend time with us. But he was good at the game too. He was older, but he could, he jumped in training. And he was good, and so and then he had this wife who he partnered with, and for the life of me I can't remember her name right now, so I apologize, but you could see how well they partnered. She would work with the ladies team and he would work with the men's team, and they partnered so well. And you'd ask them questions, and they would look at each other and really kind of try and solve the question, not just answer it, but actually like process it. And so someone who was very formative for me, and I'm very grateful for Thiago, and just a solid man of God who was firm in his faith, was kind, and served others in an incredible way. But the one I really want to touch on is Todd Elkins. I think when you asked me this question, Todd came to my mind straight away, and I was like, okay, Todd, and who else? And I was just like, do you know what? It's Todd. He was the head coach of Biola University while I was at Westmont. And some of the men that have come out of that program in Stephen Campos, Danny Martinez, Joey O'Keefe, who I got the privilege of working with, but I would call very close friends of mine, are a real reflection of who Todd is. And Todd was, I then had the opportunity to play for Todd for the Seahorses, and a man again who, he loved his family really well. His kids were always at the game. He wanted to make sure that they kind of got a glimpse into what he was coaching and teaching us. And his wife was always around serving and caring for other people. And I just loved the way he was a family man first. I think that was a real reflection of, again, faith, family, football, right? He had those things in order. But he was someone who I would see pray consistently and pray with us. He was someone who was intentional in every kind of step, right? Like whether he was dropping you or whether he was bringing you into the team, it wasn't just, hey, you're in the team. It's like, you're in the team and this is why. And I want you to know this and I want you to know that. But one of the things I actually was able to coach with Todd too. But one of the things I just love about Todd, he embodied Ted Lasso before I knew of Ted Lasso, in be curious, not judgmental. The guy asks questions in a way that invites you into the conversation and invites you to really process things. So why do you I remember him just bringing over a lad, and I was having a conversation. Why do you think that's okay? Not you're wrong, not that's that's not the way we do things here. Why do you think that's okay? And I remember just taking a step back, like, you haven't called them out. What are you doing? Come on, call them out. But I remember the guy answering, and then it was from that young man's framework of understanding of what was going on that he was able to go, actually, do you know what? No, we put the team first. And the reason we put the team first is this, and so on and so forth. And I saw him do it on multiple occasions, and they were kind of piercing. The questions were piercing, right? Like you're always like, am I going to get a Todd Elkins question? And Todd cared and does and continues to care for every player that he has, and you can see that by the players who come out. And I think ultimately that the men that come out of his programs are better for it, because to come back to it, it's faith family football. He wants to serve Christ, and he's very open and bold, right? He's unashamed of the gospel, Romans 1:16. He's very much so unashamed of the gospel, but he's someone who does so. When I first thought of unashamed of the gospel, I'm going to go tell everybody, I'm going to say loads of things, but he kind of does so in a very with Christ-like humility in many ways, right? Like, he doesn't assume he has all the answers, but he's always trying to help people find the truth, the way, the truth, and the life, right? Who is Christ? And he does so kind of just through asking questions, and so faith first and family. Like, you could see that his players at Biola knew it was about the badge, not the name on the back, the name on the front of the shirt, not the name on the back. And they served each other, they were together, and you kind of just came away from every Biola game like, that was tough, man. They were a unit. They were hard to break down, right? So it formed onto the pitch. Who they were as a group formed onto the pitch, and they were very, very good. And Joey doesn't let me forget, one of my closest friends, Joey, doesn't let me forget that they beat us a few times, and he scored on me. And but I've never seen Todd lose his temper. He's slow to anger. He's quick to listen, and when he speaks, obviously I think through the Spirit, but also speaks just intentionally. So Todd Elkins is someone, and let's be honest, he's been successful in many ways too, right? He's been successful first and foremost, as I've alluded to, by the men he's brought through, right? He's got a call to discipleship, and so he's been successful there. He's been successful in terms of football, right? He's been successful in how his teams have won things and how they've gone, but they've done it in a way that's carried God's name, and they've given glory to God. And I remember Joey just being like, hey, I just want to give glory to God when they made the national tournament. I remember him kind of talking about that. And so I think, Todd Elkins isn't a man who is in your face and is kind of overbearing. He's actually quite a short man, short man with a big beard. I don't hold that against him, but he's someone who carries a presence, and he carries God's presence, but he carries a presence because you feel like you matter with Todd Elkins, and I think that's the most important. He makes men who they are and help them reach their full potential. So I hope one day to emulate him in some way. Truly a wonderful man and a great coach.
Yeah, that's good. I love that you said there. He makes you feel like you matter. And I think that, people want to be known. People want to feel that they are part of something bigger than themselves. Great coaches really do a good job with that. The other thing you said there is the power of questions, right? We look through scripture. Jesus asked more questions than he just
he did
stuff, right? And it's that self-discovery, right? That one of my pastors had a great question similarly to, what you had said, his question, what makes you feel like that's okay, right? Pastor he said, what lie from the enemy are you believing that makes you think that behavior is okay? Right? Because that's typically what's happening there. And the idea in sin is we're believing a lie. And for that, but if you just say, hey, you're believing a lie, then that typically doesn't land with people very well. But to ask the question and make people have that. It's funny, my daughter, my oldest daughter, I'm not going to name any names, but I just said my oldest daughter, so people who know that. But we just had a funny conversation yesterday where we were talking, and she was basically parroting. She's now 21 years old. She was parroting, conversations we've had over the years. And I was just kind of smiling, and I didn't say, yeah, I told you so, but I just kind of laughed. And she goes, I know, Dad, I'm basically telling you what you told me. She goes, but I needed to have that self-discovery.
Yeah, that's it.
And a great coach will be able to guide their players to the self-discovery,
Mm,
right? And it sounds like that's what you're
mm.
talking about there with Todd. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, you see it in the game too. Like, I think Todd was one of the first coaches, not the only coach, but one of the first coaches who did it in a way that really stood out to me. Whenever he ran a drill, why are we doing this? It wasn't just go and do this. Why are we doing this? So that you end up finding that there's a philosophy, right? A framework around the style of football we want to play. And the same is true in the way we want to play, in the way we carry ourselves as Christians. Like, what does it look like to be a Christian footballer? What does that look like? And so by asking those questions, it then allows us to kind of come to kind of go through that exploration, that adventure, if you will, and come to that conclusion. Actually, this does work, and I can not only understand it, but kind of relay it back to you. And I think the greatest level of understanding is when you can teach it as well. I think I've learned that.
Yep.
The amount of things I've learned about football, which I thought I knew, I didn't know, but I've learned now as a coach, because I'm trying to soak it in and then share it. And then you learn how, what are the ways in which you share, and how do people receive things in different ways. You get a very much so a holistic approach to the game of football. But also, like I said, Todd was always faith first. So why does this matter? And how I love what you're saying in terms of I was about to say a name, your oldest daughter, kind of coming to that revelation for herself, right? When you come to those revelations, I've seen that. I'm starting to see that kind of parenting side, right? Where you tell someone something, and then they come back to you. For you, it might have been 21 years or maybe 5 or 10, whatever it might have been. But they come back to you and they're like, "Hey, coach," and I'm like, "Did I not say that to you last week?" And you're coming here as if you've got this incredible revelation and you're teaching me something, but at the same time it brings you joy, right? You've grasped this, you've understood 100%. It because you've gone through it. And I think when you go through it, you really understand it. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing something and having the understanding, but to have wisdom is how you knowing something and how you use it and bringing it together and taking it and applying it. So that's really important.
Yeah, I love that too. You talk about the idea of teaching too, is when you learn the most. And I teach a university course, and this next semester I'm going to have the students actually teach classes, right? Because that's the one I know they're going to learn the most. To have our players to be able to have input into practice sessions, and maybe even run some of them, and to be able to teach and be able to to have captains that are doing that should be a given. But particularly at the college pro levels, the captains should be teaching, should be training, should be going into that, and people should be doing that from the middle and from the bottom as well. So that's absolutely something. I know we could talk about that for days, but we're gonna move on to the next thing here. We talked a lot about just ministry and how you see what you're doing as a ministry, but I just wanted to, I know we've talked about it in the last few years since we've known each other, just how you see what you're doing, yes, as coaching, but as ministry. And I know a lot of people just think of sports ministry as, oh, you do a game and then you do a halftime talk, or you do a game and you have a platform to share the gospel at halftime. But how do you see ministry in sports, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just going to steal from Graham. I love Colossians 4:2-6 and a pray, play, say. And I think the reason I love that is because it's really, really reformed, and I'm still learning it, because you continue to live out the gospel. The gospel isn't just one thing, right? It's something you live out daily, and you have to continue to preach to yourself and learn and understand. But pray is to talk to God, to start with the Lord, right? And to wake up in the morning and pray is to go, Lord, I want to surrender this to you. I want to surrender my ambitions, my desires. I want to surrender this to you and give this over, right? And trust that, you know what, I want to have these conversations. Would you allow me to have these conversations? Or I want to be able to do this, but Lord, your will be done, not mine. And to give glory to God for what he's given you and what he might bring and what he might not bring, right? The Lord gives and he takes away. And so to pray is to go, do you know what, Lord, it's yours. this is yours. You've, by the grace of God, I'm a sinner, I'm not worthy. You've made me right, but you've also welcomed me into this. It's yours. So to pray is the first component, whether it's, you know, in competitive sport, whether it's in trying to reach young people, whether it's going to reach an unreached people group, whatever, whoever, sorry, you're reaching. I think it's first to start with the Lord, right? And to go, in and of myself, I can't do it. I cannot do it. So Holy Spirit, would you fill me? Holy Spirit, would you equip me? Holy Spirit, would you empower me? Because that's, you know, that's the promise of Christ, you know, when we're saved, that we get the Spirit. So pray and play is to live in a way that would reflect him. It says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, but then it then goes on to say, you know, that God works all these things in you. So it's Christ working in what we're working out, what Christ works in. And I love that. Someone, I listened to this podcast by two brothers called the Benham brothers, professional athletes, professional baseball players who kind of left it all behind to do ministry. But I love that they say, work out what God has worked in. God is going to work in you and equip you to be able to do that. So, you know, to live in a way that reflects Christ and look at what Christ did. How did he care for people? And so that's definitely, you know, what does it look like to honor him, to do so in excellence, right? You know, especially as we talk about football, I want my players to get stuck into challenges. I want my players to work harder than anybody. I want them to you know, to be ruthless in front of goal. I want them to be those type of things, but I want them to do it in a way that doesn't compare themselves or say that they're better than someone else, but actually says that this is who we are and this is our identity, and but we care for you as well. And caring for someone sometimes means, you know, putting 6 past them so that they can grow and get better. So I think there's a little funny nuance there, but and then say, right, like, when you have the opportunity, are you bold enough to say something? Are you bold enough to go, do you know what, I do follow Jesus and this is why? You know, why do you, when the question comes, why do you live this way? It talks about it in First Peter as well. Like, why do you live this way? Or why are you this way? Well, do you know what? I wasn't always this way. Christ changed me. You know, Christ changed me. And this is the freedom I've experienced. I actually had a real honor of going to speak with the lads at the Seahorses recently. And I got to share, they were talking about having a heart for God. And I said, you know, you have a heart for God, but it's rooted in knowing that God has a heart for you. And when you have a heart for God, the reality is you get this thing called unity. When you have a heart for anything, you have unity with it, right? We're in union with it, right? You got a heart for football, you got union with it. When it lets you down, it hurts, right? Football is a game that, wow, it hurts when you lose sometimes, but it's joyous when you win. If you have union with food, you're gonna pudge up a bit if you don't take care of yourself, right? But unity with God gives you, I alluded it to earlier, but it gives you peace and it gives you power and it gives you purpose, and those things kind of transcend other things, right? The temporal things. So being able to kind of share those things, pray, play, say, is really kind of, I think, a way in which we can kind of carry out sports ministry. But I will say, I wonder if I could just share a quick story of ministry, which I didn't think was ministry at the time, because it was God planting the seed. It was me being obedient. I think obedience is a real important part. I was playing at a small club called Sheppey United, Isla Sheppey, and I remember early on, I was bringing my Bible into the changing room, and I got a lot of stick for it, as we say in England, a lot of hard time for it. But the boys began to kind of become accustomed to, this is who Josh says he is. And I remember a lad saying, Jesus wasn't even real. I said, what year do you live in? He goes, at the time, I think it was 2018. He said, 2018. I said, 2018 years after who? And he goes, oh. And just being able to tell him, you know, we had these fun conversations, and I was like, you know, all of modern history is based off of this man Jesus. He's pretty spectacular. But after time, they kind of realized who I was, and that I wasn't going to budge from being a Christian. And I remember one day that the Bible got passed around the changing room. One of the lads next to me said, can I look at that? And and he was like, oh, okay. And he showed someone else, and it literally went all the way around before it came back to me. It wasn't something I had planned. And then we were playing a game. We were 3-2 down, 96th minute. I went up, and this was a week before Easter. I went up for a corner, 96th minute, and I scored a header as a goalkeeper. I remember jumping into the crowd, celebrating, nearly got sent off. It was just a bit of a funny situation. But I remember coming back into change room, and the gaffer, the manager, said to me, Glover, well done, fantastic, you saved us. Like, what do you want to say? I said, boys, who wants to come to church with me next weekend? And they all laughed. No one showed up, but they knew. And I remember being really discouraged by that, that I hadn't done anything. And it was about a year later, I was at Concord, and the assistant manager from the previous team, he had given me a real hard time. When I was at Sheppey, I remember one of the boys asking me about Christianity, and he said, don't ask him questions. He wants you to ask him questions. All that Christianity, it's a load of rubbish. And I just remember being like, why are you giving me such a hard time? You're giving me so much grief. So I got a call a year later, and he gets me on the phone. Hey, Josh, it's Barry. So I say, okay, how you doing? You're okay? How's everything going on? How's the football? And he kind of just ignored the question. He goes, Josh, I'm thinking about getting baptized, and you're the only person I've ever seen be a Christian. I want to know if you think it's the right idea. And I just kind of went silent, like just sat in that, like, this isn't someone I even tried to reach. I was trying to reach my teammates, truthfully, but it was the fact that I was consistent. It was the fact that through the challenges, through the cheeky comments here and there, probably through seeing some of the lads begin to kind of respect, that this was who I was, and I wasn't going to change. And when I had a good game, and even when I didn't have a good game, I tried to kind of give God the glory. I remember before every game, I learned this at Westmont. I just prayed, but I wanted to point to the sky, because I wanted people to know, you know what, I'm playing for Jesus, I'm not playing for me. And I wanted to give them a sign of that. That a year later, the guy who'd given me the hardest time out of anybody at that club called me and said he wanted to get baptized, and he went on to get baptized. And so that was an incredible story of how, actually, do you know what, it's the Lord. We plant seeds,
That's right.
We're obedient, we walk in it, but it's the Lord who moves. It's the Lord who brings the growth. It's only God who can change a man's heart. It's not me. And so that's very freeing. And so that's a little picture of sports ministry in a realm that I didn't think was even going to be sports ministry. So sorry I didn't touch on all the other incredible ministries, obviously Christians in Sport, the Sports Factory, MAI, some awesome ministries, but I think that was one that stood out to me. Nothing I did.
It's one kingdom, right? So that's what hopefully all of us are doing it for that. And I love hearing that. And you said a couple things there that I just want to highlight. One is the idea of consistency. That's interesting that one of my best friends in the world, I've shared the gospel with him many times. I've known him since we were 6 months old, like running our diapers around, together, and or nappies, excuse me. Nappies. Nappies. And it was actually during COVID. So, I'm almost 50 years old, I'm 48. And it's during COVID, he said afterwards, after kind of all the craziness and whatever, he said, Phil, you were the most consistent person I've seen, or I know through that time. And it was an interesting word. And as you talked about it, I think that is people in a world full of craziness and roller coasters and ups and downs. And it's even just simply being steady and being consistent is a massive witness in a world of craziness and chaos and roller coaster. So that's one thing. The other was, the idea, you talk about ministry and sports and talking about all these different guys, and being consistent and pray, play, say. That works so much too, because it's God doing all the work. We know that. But also, as we talked about earlier, it's kind of come full circle to the beginning when we were talking about the trust that you build through sports, just by being a great goalkeeper, by being a great, steady voice, a steady person. People will ask, you always hear that people will ask, oh, well, what is different in you? that only happens when you are living it out. That only happens when you are steady and you are
Yeah.
consistent
Yeah.
up through the highs and lows.
Hmm.
You celebrate and you get excited. You go in the crowd, you
Hmm.
go crazy, you almost get sent off because you're so excited. But at the end of the day, on the important things, you're going to be steady and you're going to be able to do that. So that's something that, folks, I mean, that's really, I love how you talked about that, because I think so often we think we have to do these big presentations and we got to be the great public
Yeah.
speaker and we got to do
Hmm.
these next thing, this big
Hmm.
next great revival.
Hmm.
The reality is, I think most of the ministry happens in just the day to day, doing life together, being consistent, loving
Yeah.
well, serving well. And as coaches, we have massive opportunity to do that. As parents, we have massive opportunity. As friends, we have massive opportunity. As
Mm.
teammates, we have massive opportunity to do those things. And so I love that, because you kind of hit on all of them. And even as we talk about your teams, and I love hearing you talk about your teams and what excites you. And I remember after 1 year at Biola, I think it was after your year at Biola, our first year there. You had 2 years there, 1 year there. I
One
can't
year,
remember.
1 year, 1
1
year.
year. After your year, you said, the stories you told had nothing to do with the football that was being played on
Mm.
the field, but it
Mm.
was about the relationships that you had
Mm.
with the players and the
Yeah.
friendships and the impact that you were able to see a kid come to know the Lord, and to be able to
Mm.
see that was your highlight. And that's what I love, and I love about all that. So
Mm.
all right, man. Well, we got to wrap it up. We are over the hour mark,
Yeah,
believe it
yeah,
or not.
sorry.
But no, don't be sorry. It's good stuff. It's all great stuff. But let's kind of go into a speed round. We have a
Okay.
couple questions we ask everybody, but I also
Yeah.
just want to hear from your perspective. We've asked a lot of our guests
Mm.
what they feel about the current state of U.S. soccer, and I know this is a
Mm.
much longer conversation we have time for.
Yeah.
But let's kind of see it as like a lightning round. And with all your
Quick.
background, playing all over the place, um, growing up all over the place, living in the UK, being here in the US, what do you see as kind of the best and the worst of US soccer right now?
Yeah, let me start with the worst and then I'll move to the best. I think the worst for me, I will try and do this quickly, is I think the accessibility of club soccer at the youth age. I think it costs a lot of money, and so seeing there's so many incredible young players out there, we see them come to a camp and then you say, hey, what club do you play for? I can't afford it, my family can't afford it, and there's not enough accessibility. And I think we've got to change the system ever so slightly to make it a little bit more accessible. Can we find ways to make scholarships available, or can we have clubs fund it? These pro clubs have so much money. Can we fund academies where lads aren't having to pay to go play club soccer, because there's so much talent out there, and it's a growing sport. And I think we see that in the UK, we see it other parts where football is very accessible and it doesn't cost a lot of money, but here in the US it costs a lot. So that's my frustration at the grassroots level. I'm excited about US soccer, I really am, because I think one, it's on the rise. We're talking right after Messi's just signed for Inter
Right.
Miami. I think that's gonna spark more and more interest here in the US. The World Cup's coming here in 2026. People are talking about football, and unfortunately they're calling it soccer, but they're talking about football. And I have to obviously touch on the environment in which I work on. I love the college soccer scene. I love it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Men are developed in at least in the Christian university, they're developed as academics, right? They're equipped to men to go into the workforce, developed as football players, but they're developed as Christians as well. And it's such a holistic approach. It's not just a one size fits all. It's amazing. It's honestly wonderful. Men come out of it on the other side, whether going pro or going on, better men for it, and better revelation, at least I hope, through our university and the things we do of God. So love college soccer, excited for the US national team, some real cool talent coming through. So yeah, I'm excited for US soccer.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly with both of those things. All right. How do you use the lessons you've learned directly from the game? We've talked about a lot of them, so maybe that you just echo something you've already said, but there could be something else you've been saving for this. The lessons you learned directly from the game of soccer, in your relationship with your girlfriend. I know that's going well.
It's going well.
I checked on Instagram today just to make sure nothing weird had happened. So with that
doing
and
well.
other relationships outside the game.
Yeah. Dating an absolute wonderful woman of God, and Tiffany Johnson, and like Graham said, really punching above my weight. She's incredible, and I think she teaches me more than I teach her. And I don't know if she realizes that all the time, but she's a woman who's been incredibly successful, carries titles, is doing an incredible job, but is so humble and so kind and so thoughtful of others. It's just considerate. And is not finding her identity in those things. And I think, of course, with anybody, there's a wrestle for those things, but not finding her identity in those things and putting people first. And I have a real dilemma on my hands this weekend because the Champions League final is on, and she's asked me to go to a family event. And I'm just trying to find my way through both things, you know? So how do I apply that to our relationship? I think every player is different, and it's about learning how we, how my players will gel with each other. I think with Tiffany and I, our primary focus is to serve God and to honor Him in our relationship and in everything else we do. And so it's finding how we navigate the ways in which we do that, and what ways we can partner with each other. Ultimately, as Christians, we're not just dating for the sake of dating. We're dating to have a partnership, and obviously maybe one day head in the direction of a marriage. But it's navigating, how do we serve each other? How do we run towards Christ? And what does that look like? And so I think I try and do that in the way I kind of coach my players too, right? How do they gel with each other, and how do they understand each other's strengths and their weaknesses, and how do they complement each other? Her and I we always talk about grace and truth. Jesus came, the Lord brought all these things. Jesus came with grace and truth. How do we approach each other with grace and truth? How do we be loving and kind and patient with each other? But also, how do we speak truth into each other's lives? And how do we do that to others too? So, I think those things.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. And I just had this thought of, what if all of our teams and all of our relationships were actually filled with grace and truth? Like that would, I just think of the teams that I coach, and there's either, it seems like we as humans either have way much grace or just a ton of truth, but we often don't do both really well at the same time. And that's something that absolutely agree with. All right, last question, brother. This has been a lot of fun. I had no doubt a lot of good stuff out of this too. But what have you watched, read, or listened to that has most impacted your thinking on how soccer explains life, or how football explains life and leadership? The Bible, there it is.
Yeah, it's number one for sure. Got to be in the Word every day, and it's just been so formative, as it isn't, but it's also sharp, and it's the Spirit makes it come alive, and it's applicable to everything. Whenever I'm in doubt, to go back there, but trying to start there every morning too. And then this book by Brett McCracken, The Wisdom Pyramids, awesome book. Basically just reframing how we take on information. I think we're bombarded by information, by different forms of media, different forms of thought, and he says basically he takes the food pyramid and reapplies it, with the Bible at the bottom, church, then God's creation, books, and then music and creation, and music and kind of creative outlook, and then finally there's a little bit of media in there. And I think we can be so swayed and have that so backwards. Excuse me, sorry. And I think this book's been really awesome. I'm only a little bit through it, but The Wisdom Pyramid by Brett McCracken's been awesome. And then of course, I do love, just from a football standpoint, and if we're talking about leadership, Steven Gerrard, incredible football player, incredible. Sorry, I know you're a United fan, but leader. Growing up, he was the epitome of a leader for me, captain of England. And obviously, as a young lad, you dream of those things, but the way he led with passion, care for others, striving for success, bringing other people along, kind of leading the way, right? But also, having a vision and bringing people into that vision. He was amazing. And so his documentary, Make Us Dream, I think you and I actually talked about it last time we saw each other, was wonderful. So maybe I'll reverse those orders. Make Us Dream was wonderful. If we're going to go with the book, Make Us Dream, then Brett McCracken's book, The Wisdom Pyramid, and then of course, everything comes from Scripture. God is good.
Absolutely. I actually have read my son's paper on the wisdom pyramid. I haven't read the wisdom pyramid.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because Brett is a Biola professor, and
Yeah.
that book, I mean, based on the paper, looked awesome. So,
Yeah.
and the paper was pretty good too. Little shout out to my son there at
Yeah. Go
Biola.
on, Drew.
So, anyway, bro, hey, this has been so great. Thanks
Yeah.
again for being a part of the conversation. Thanks for just being faithful. Thanks for being consistent. Thanks for being a good brother and friend. And I appreciate you a ton.
Cheers, Phil. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's definitely gone a lot quicker, and it's been a lot easier just to chat with you and enjoy the conversation around football leadership and the Lord. And yeah, always grateful for you and your family. You guys are awesome.
Awesome. Well, folks, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for this conversation that you engaged it, and just thank you for what you're doing. I know if you're listening to this show, you're using these things and you're applying them to your life. And as we talked about, this pray, play, say, it's not just something that's a cool saying. It's something that if we live that out, it will make impact. It will make incredible impact. We might actually see a little bit of shalom in our communities. And so I encourage you folks to just listen to all this stuff and really apply it in your lives. Also, in the show notes, you can find all the things we referred to, the book, the documentary, everything else we talked about in the show. We're also linked to Josh's dad, Robert Glover's Care for Children. We'll link to the documentary Children of Shanghai, which is awesome documentary about the work that happened. I believe Josh has a couple pictures throughout that film as well. So he makes some cameos, just appearances through there. They wanted to make him the star because he's really good looking, but that happens. So anyway. Also, if you want to learn more about Warrior Way, about coaching the bigger game, the links to that will be in the show notes. Most importantly, folks, I just pray that you're taking all that you're learning from this show and you're using it to be a better spouse, a better parent, a better friend, a better leader, better coach, better in everything that you do. And you continually remind yourself that soccer and football, depending on where you are, truly do explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.